right, Mike Furmanski with section 2 here. This is the understanding the problem and why traditional approaches actually fail. Oh my goodness, we don't need failure, do we? No, of course not. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you some skills. So, really before we talk about, any solutions, we need to actually first address why the traditional approaches often fail veterans specifically. I'm going to share 5 common pitfalls that I've observed personally and personally experienced myself in church veteran ministry. Number 1 pitfall, it's the hero label. We mean well when we call every veteran a hero, okay? But here's the truth. Many veterans are deeply uncomfortable with this label, okay? They think of their fallen buddies as the heroes, and they remember their mistakes. They struggle, essentially, with what they had to do. And then when we automatically sign the hero label, we can inadvertently create a barrier, if you will. Veterans feel that they can't be honest about their struggles because you've kind of put them on this pedestal. I'm here to tell you, as a combat veteran, I was part of the initial invasion of Afghanistan in the special operations community in 2001, 2002. I do not consider myself a hero at all. Some people around me, even family members, may throw that title at me. I refuse to accept that as a title. And there's a multitude of reasons why, but the why is not important. What's important is to just understand that not everyone who serves is a hero, right? Or feels like a hero. And that's an internal struggle that shouldn't be just displayed in the church, so to speak. You can view them as a hero, but maybe not voice it, for example. A better approach that we recommend at Kingdom Rally Point / Kingdom Defense is really to honor their service, right? Without assuming their experience. So you can say, thank you for your service. I would argue that makes me a little uncomfortable too, but it's very common and it's fine. And you can then just move to genuine relationship building. Get to know the person, not because of what they've done or what medals they hold or any of that type of stuff, but get to know them as an individual, right? You can ask about their transition home. You can listen more. You can, ask them stories and things like that. Ultimately, listen more than you speak would be a good blueprint as well. But just, hey, thank you for your service. Oh, awesome. And just leave it at that. Don't let their military service define who they are. That could be a problem in the future, right? Is it a part of who they are? Absolutely, absolutely. So don't diminish the fact that they served diligently in the military. No, but just understand that you can't assume that everyone's experience is the same. Some people serve in the military, never deployed, never saw combat, never did anything really of great heroic status, but they still served, and that's okay. And if you start throwing the hero label on them, they're going to start thinking, I'm a fraud, I'm this, I'm that. And so it actually has the negative impact on what you're trying to achieve, which is just getting to know them, right? So pitfall number 2, treating all trauma as equivalent. I've heard well-meaning church members say things like, I know how you feel. I went through a really hard divorce, so it's the same thing, right? Or, my father's death was traumatic to me too, so I get what you're going through. Look, these experiences are genuinely difficult. Combat trauma ultimately does have a unique characteristic that civilian traumas typically don't share. It's one of those things where I'd never say, even amongst other veterans, I know what you're going through because I did this in the military. I never, ever say that. Not as a pastor, not as a co-veteran, not as a special operations veteran, nothing. I may have gone through harder times than them, and they may have gone through harder times than me, and none of that really matters, to be honest with you. I don't understand their traumas. I don't. Unless I was right next to them, living their experience, I don't understand them. So I don't pretend to. And I would just argue, don't try to compare the two. Now, I've got a few things listed here I'm going to talk about. Combat veterans often deal with, number one, it's moral injury. That's the spiritual and psychological damage from participating in or witnessing events that violate one's moral code. I can tell you as a veteran in special operations, I have taken lives. Okay. That's against my moral code today, right? There's things that I had to deal with and understand to get through that. I'm not going to make this about me by any means, but just understand many veterans are faced with that type of thing. Another one is complex survivor's guilt. We've all heard of survivor's guilt, I think. That's where one wrestles with the fact that they lived when others died. This is something that plagued both myself and my wife, who's also a combat veteran, by the way. And this is one of those things that deeply impacted us. Particular missions that we're pulled off of last minute because we were needed somewhere else, or so-and-so needs to get on this convoy and because he needs to get to Bagram or whatever it might be. And ultimately that convoy gets ambushed and there's a real negative consequence to that. We can't. So that's a burden that we bear as combat veterans sometimes, right? Not all the time. But speaking in generalities, it's fairly common to have the survival skill. Hypervigilance is another one. This is where a persistent state of like heightened alertness, and it just doesn't turn off, right? I can tell you right now that when I sit in a restaurant, I find certain seats where I can see exits. I can do all these things. This is a hypervigilance thing. I'm not a paranoid person. Things like that. I live my life just like anyone else, just like any other veteran. But it's very common that it's funny to some extent that a group of veterans, we all want to sit in the same seat. So we all go out to dinner or lunch together and we're all like, man, I want to sit in that seat. I don't want to sit in that seat. So we don't like our backs to doors, typically speaking. There's a lot of things that we're a little bit hypervigilant on. And we're going to talk about ways that churches can use these things, not as detriments, not as crutches, but also use them and utilize them. Like, for example, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but hypervigilance, maybe you have a security team. This could be a huge benefit, having someone who's hypervigilant and is constantly aware and has situational awareness and awareness of their surroundings. That may make a great security team person to understand and see like, something's out of place here. I'm going to address it, right? As an example. Questions about God's sovereignty when it comes to warfare is another one. This is a theological struggle. And most pastoral training that I've personally gone through anyways, and I've discussed it with other pastors, it just doesn't address it. It just doesn't address the situation where people who've experienced war can wrap their brain around God's sovereignty. So that's some of the things that specifically combat veterans often deal with that don't compare to civilian, right? So again, we're not getting into a solution, but a better approach to, treating all trauma as equivalent, a better approach would be to validate their unique experience. Just validate it. You can express empathy without claiming equivalence. You can say things like, look, I can't fully understand what you've been through, but I'm here to listen, and I'm here to walk alongside you with whatever you might need. Ultimately, that's better than, oh, well, I get it because my father died. Or I get what you're going through because, I was once in a car accident and it was really scary. Right? You immediately downplayed. Moving on to pitfall number 3, invasive questions. This is very common. The curiosity about combat experiences, it's natural, but like questions, did you kill anybody? Or what was the worst thing you ever saw? They're just deeply invasive. Like these questions are not, until you really get to know a person, a veteran's not going to open up to you anyways. I can tell you that right off the bat. They don't want to relive their traumatic experiences or share intimate moral struggles that they've had with someone that they don't even trust yet. So they got to get to know the person, get to trust them, and eventually they may tell you some stories. Working in youth, there's a fascination, right? Especially amongst the boys. Did you kill anybody? Stuff like that. Now, for some reason, it's easier for me to let it slide when it comes to youth and things like that. I don't know why. So I would just be like, yes, I have. Or be like, oh, we're not going to talk about that. I don't get offended or deeply troubled. But it is weird when a grown man is asking you that question for some reason. Don't know why. Just telling you my anecdotal experience. So a better approach to this, let the veterans share it on their terms, okay? Create a safe space where they can open up, right? Get to know them first, relationship build first. And then if they want to open up about some of their combat experiences, you might get some awesome stories. Maybe it's going to happen not in a church setting. Maybe it's going to happen on a very personal level. Maybe you're at a bonfire with them, hanging out at their house. The next thing you know, they just start opening up and telling you stories, but you have to first get to know them. And that's just part of it. So moving on to pitfall number 4, ignoring the military culture. Look, many veterans, first of all, the military operates on a very distinct culture in itself. There's a hierarchy, there's direct communication, there's mission, there's focus, there's a brotherhood that's often forged in adversity, by the way. And so when veterans transition into a civilian church culture, it's a challenge, right? The contrast is almost opposite, right? So churches that don't understand this culture have a real problem, and they misinterpret what veterans' behaviors might be as standoffish or aggressive or uncommitted or whatever. And it's just not the case, right? So if you ignore the military culture that many of them, especially if someone did 20 years, this is really the culture. This is their culture now, right? They spent 18 years in a culture of civility, joined the military, and they spent 20 years in the culture of military. Which one's more pronounced in their life? Probably the culture of the military. This was a real challenge for my wife, actually, more than me. For whatever reason, I tend to surround myself. Everywhere I go, it's like veterans attract to me, and I attract the veterans naturally, and that's just how it works. I think it's common for everyone. My wife, a lot of people understand that she was a combat veteran. She carries herself in such a way that you wouldn't know, and she doesn't present herself as like this hardened combat veteran, but she is. But what's funny about it is she's very direct in her approach to communication, which is very common in the military culture. And so many women and men often expect a woman to be soft in her approach. My wife is not, right? She's just direct. She's like, I don't like that. I don't like what you're doing. You're being rude, right? So whatever, right? She's just very direct. That's part of the military culture. She spent, 11 or 12 years in the military, and 9 of it, or no, not 9 of it, what was it? 4 of it was deployed to Afghanistan. So, anyways, a better approach: learn basic military culture. Just learn it. Learn about where they're coming from. If we're able to, as a church, learn about the background of the Chinese, because we have a Chinese population, or the Black culture, or whatever culture it might be, to better implement them into our church, why would we not do the same for military? It is a unique culture. Learn about it. Learn basic military culture. Understand the rank structure. Could be an easy start. Branch differences. Understanding that the Army is the best branch. I'm just kidding. Obviously, Army veteran here. But understanding the culture of the different branches is important as well. Each branch has a unique history and unique culture. Understand that, let's see, what else? And understand, this is funny because of my wife, right? Recognize that a veteran's directness, it's not rudeness. It's just the way we communicate in the military. Now, for me, in special operations, it's very common. Everything's a joke, right? We're joking nonstop. Everything's a joke. Part of that is probably trauma bonding and different things like that. We call it embracing the suck, right? We're in a situation that sucks. We embrace it. We laugh about it. It's hilarious to us, right? So for me, the culture of special operations in my time in the Army is we communicate through laughter. We communicate through joking. Everything becomes a joke. Even the worst situations in the world become a joke to us, right? That can often come off very off-putting to a civilian population. Death, for me, doesn't have the same sting, for example, right? Death is a very common thing for me. I've been around death my whole life, serving in the Catholic Church originally as an altar server as a young boy, served multiple funerals. I had a very large family, so there was many, many funerals I was going to from a very young age, a couple a year, not a big deal, right? Joined the military, lost some of the closest people in my life. Lost my father at a very, very young age. Well, not very young, but 20 years old, and I was barely an adult, really. So death just doesn't have this thing. So when people die, like I don't shed a tear. It's just part of the life cycle for me. And I find myself cracking jokes, but that's how I deal with things. I'm not sure, right? I'm not here to give you all about my experience. I'm just anecdotally explaining to you that oftentimes that's part of our communication and culture as well. And then people seeing like in this very severe and serious situation, these yahoos over here are joking about it. Look, it's just how we deal with stuff, right? So understand it. All right, so moving on to pitfall number 5. One-time events instead of ongoing ministry. Churches are really good at doing some awesome things during a Veterans Day service or recognition on a Sunday that they've been, and think that, I've addressed the Veterans Ministry because I did this one service during, Veterans Day ministry or whatever. What veterans need most is a sustained community, ongoing support, and long-term relationships. That's what we all need. Veterans need that too. Oftentimes we find that amongst other veterans. But if those other veterans aren't attending a church, it can actually lead us down the wrong path, lead us to drinking alcohol with them or whatever it might be, and lead us down a path that becomes more self-destructive. And so as a veterans ministry, what we want to do is we want to offer that same long-term solution, an ongoing ministry that attracts and invites veterans specifically into it, where we can talk about the gospel, talk about the good word, talk about what God's doing in their lives, how they've changed. Will it offer an opportunity for them to talk about their combat stories and open up about their personal situation? Absolutely. It'll grow to that. But offer that community, offer that ongoing support. So that's what this is about, is to help you understand where the pitfalls, but also now we need to move into solutions. And really what we want to help you do is build a sustainable year-round ministry structure that really discusses exactly how, and we're really going to discuss how to do that in the steps ahead. This may be a dedicated veterans ministry, or if you're a smaller church and things like that, maybe it's just simply adopting techniques, tactics, and protocols and things like that attract, invite, and becomes a part of your own ministry that can include in veterans, right? So that's what we have.